Welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thank you so much for being here with me today. Today, my guest is Mark Needham, and if you're not familiar with Mark, Mark is an amazing engineer who has a big history in the industry. He's Grammy nominated. He has multiple platinum records. He's a mixing engineer who has worked with artists such as Fleetwood Mac, The Killers, Imagine Dragons, Isaak, Dolly Parton, so many more. He also, in addition to his amazing mix work, he also does artist development as well. So we definitely get into a lot of that in this conversation today, because I think it's a really interesting topic that we haven't talked about here before. And this idea of finding artists that you truly believe in and working with them to develop their sound and develop their career, get them in the right circles of people, get them connected in the industry, and really being an additional member of that group, you know, whether it's a single artist or whether it's a band or not, whatever. It's just, you know, working with that person to help develop their sound and help them get better and better, showcase their talents in the best way possible, and really help them grow their career. And Mark has definitely done that. He's pretty much responsible for bands like The Killers and Imagine Dragons blowing up. And we get into a lot of that in this conversation here today. So I think you're going to find it really fascinating. And Mark's a great guy. He's got lots of great stories. So let's just jump right into this interview. Mark Needham, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. For people who might not know your history or your background on how you got into music and into mixing and all the awesome stuff that you're working on these days, can you give us that story?
Sure, I'll try to make it somewhat brief. I guess I graduated high school early when I was 16 and went with my guitar teacher down to San Francisco. We started a rock music school down there. And there was an empty closet that we weren't using. And, I'd always had tape recorders and, everything that I took apart as well. I was a guitar player and played drums after that. But I was always really into kind of taking my stuff apart and figuring out new ways to hook things together and record stuff. So I started a recording studio in this closet I had a Sony tape recorder and one Neumann microphone and a 2-input or 4-input Altec tube mixer with the treble and bass control, and that was my first studio. I just would record acoustic versions of the students who wanted to record some of their songs. I eventually that kind of turned into a contract with this label called Kicking Mule Records, which was kind of my first big label deal, So I recorded all the Kicking Mule records with guys like Stephen Grossman and Duck Baker. They were ragtime acoustic guitar players. So I did. God, I can't remember how many albums with them. A lot, eventually I took over a room downstairs in the school. I had a partner I brought in. We built a 8-track tape recorder and built our own console. And eventually we were doing more business through the school, so we split off to our own studio and we built our own 24-track tape recorder and our own console and. That was it. I never really worked I've never worked as an assistant in a studio or I was all just reading books and trying stuff. So that's how I got started.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because to get into all of that stuff and to see that quick of a trajectory, a lot of people do follow that traditional path of, trying to get into a studio as an assistant or that kind of thing. But it sounds like you just kind of learned it all on your own and through trial and error, which is very, very cool.
That was it. There were several errors along the way, but
hey, you need to make those mistakes along the way, right? And I'm sure you still make mistakes. It's like we all do, right? It's like you have to try things out and see what works, what doesn't, and sometimes you get those happy accidents that from then on become your go-to things or whatever,
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you were teaching? Were you teaching like guitar at that point? You said.
I was not teaching guitar. Okay. I was helping run. I came down and was kind of running the audio end of stuff there, because we had all the students would form bands. I would put got the PAs together, and then started my studio, and then I ended up having a recording class at the school. At that point, I'd gotten good enough to fool people, I guess.
That's very cool. Well, I imagine that, if you're constantly around musicians who are forming bands and, you happen to have the studio where they're learning their instruments and that kind of stuff, it's probably a pretty good way to get people through the door and start helping people with maybe some of their first recordings. And then from there, they come back and, it just grows from there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing because I think there's a lot of people who are maybe listening to this and thinking like, where can I go to start my studio business? Like they want to pursue it, but they're not sure how to do it. And so it's like creating opportunities like that I think is really important because whether you thought it was going to take off to the degree it did or not, but I think that's a great avenue for people to explore. Is like
it's so much cheaper now for people to set up a studio. I mean. When I started, we actually had to build our own console and, build our own 24 track. We got a couple of old 2-inch video recorders and I had a partner who knew how to run a machine shop and was really good at electronics. And we built our own tape recorder because I didn't have $80,000 to buy a tape recorder or $500,000 to buy a console, so we just made our own stuff. Now it's pretty affordable for people to actually get started and set up a home studio.
Of course. Well, it sounded like it just grew and grew for you, and then it got to the point where you started to work with some really big artists over those, over your career. You've worked with people like Dolly Parton, Chris Isaak, Lindsey Buckingham, all that. Like, it sounded like your career just like. Was there a point in your career where you felt like things just started to really explode for you?
I remember my first big major label album was with Taj Mahal back in the 70s. And that was kind of like, all right, like I'm doing a record on Warner Brothers with Taj Mahal, who I was a big fan of, from the late 60s, and it's like, I'm working with a guy whose records I used to listen to, and we did 2 or 3 records together. I started with Chris pretty early on. I was working with a friend of mine, Eric Jacobson, who was an A&R guy at Warner's, kind of a off the books A&R guy, and he had a lot of hits in the 60s. Let me think, he did Spirit in the Sky, bunch of tunes on that. So we were working with some of his bands from the 60s, and he was really into finding artists and developing artists. So Chris Isaak was one of the artists that we'd gone down to see playing at a little punk club, and he, we did some songs. He got him a deal on Warner's, and made all those records with Chris. I don't know, 12 or 13, I guess. But I started having more success probably by the late 70s, 80s. And bands like Cake, just all those San Francisco bands. I've worked with all those guys up there pretty much. And then moved to LA probably, and I was spending more time in Los Angeles probably in the late 90s than I was in the Bay Area. I got an introduction to help finish up a Lindsey Buckingham record from my friend Rob Cavallo. And I spent almost 9 months to a year working with Lindsey on this record, living in a hotel, and then that turned into a double Fleetwood Mac album. And it's like, I just got to drive back, get a truck, get all my stuff, and move to LA. And had a kind of another round of some interesting stuff down here, doing development projects. The Killers, I was kind of doing that at the same time as Fleetwood Mac, but so it's been a fun ride. I don't mean to meander.
No, I love hearing that story, and it's interesting because you had mentioned the topic of artist development, and I was curious about that. When it comes to that sort of thing, what what do you consider artist development? Like, what's typically involved in that process for you?
I mean, I really started doing that after, I mean, I'd worked with Eric Jacobson and, and saw what he was doing through the 60s and early 70s. And when we had that, I noticed when I did that song Wicked Game with Chris Isaak, that had that guitar sound and all the reverb. And so that's all anybody wanted me to do, and I already did that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that again. I figured out this cool guitar sound but all right, I did that. I don't want to do it over and over for the rest of my life. And I was starting to see, engineers, producers who got stuck in those ruts and how they quickly got timed out as things moved on, by not just being varied enough in their, in their discography and their methods of doing stuff. So I really started working on developing bands just to have something else that I could take in and play for label guys, because it's like, well, I can also, I recorded and produced, probably 40 or 50 albums on Teresa Records, which was a jazz label. So we worked with Pharoah Saunders and, just Ed Adderley, all these different jazz artists. I'd had, the history doing ragtime acoustic. I'd done a lot of different styles of music, from classical to ragtime to jazz to rock to, I wanted to keep that. I just wanted to keep a wider vision in where I was going, and the best way for me to do that, to me, seemed to be just to record stuff that I thought was cool, and use that if I'm meeting with label guys. Hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And, that way you're not coming into a label. Also, you're not going in for label meetings. This was back when label meetings were very important. You're not going in and just begging for work. I'm coming in and going, yeah, I've got this band, and this band are all things that I'm in the process of developing. So it gives you a reason to be in the office and play them stuff that they might not realize. They think you're the Chris Isaak guitar sound guy, and that's it, and you play them 4 or 5 different things. I go, oh God, but I don't know if I want to sign that, but I got another band that I love the way this thing sounds. I got a band that's kind of like it, but so it was an easier way to go in and have those meetings and not just be the goofball going in. You got any albums for me to mix? Well, nothing that sounds like Chris Isaak today, but
I love that, though. I think that's such a great approach to just showing your value to the labels, right? Because so many people are fighting for those same gigs, but to be that person that can say look, I know I'm good at this, but also I've got this additional talent that you guys might find you guys might want to work with, and you can see that I'm diverse with the people I work with. I think that just really keeps you top of mind and shows your value, and because of that, it makes you stand out versus everyone else that's fighting for those same gigs. I mean,
I'm teaching. I mentor at USC here in Los Angeles, and I was just talking with my mentee the other day. He's graduating in 3 weeks. It's like, well, what am I going to do? It's like, go to K-Rock and get the locals only bands and check out all their music. Go down and see them live and just go up and, the best way to really start building a career and get your name known is just record a lot of bands, and find a bunch of cool bands and record them, because bands talking to other bands and playing their tracks. Hey, listen to what we just did. God, who recorded that? It sounds awesome, But bands talking to bands, to me has always been a really proven way of just bringing more stuff through the door and cool stuff through the door.
For sure. Yeah, and cool bands tend to hang out in cool band circles, I guess. Hopefully, right? Because if they're onto something cool, then they try to book gigs with other bands that are in a similar style, that kind of thing. So you'll find those. Yeah,
it's
people.
A whole other communication network going on outside of, that's outside of the circles of the general public and stuff. It's bands talking to bands on tour backstage, and
Absolutely. Yeah. And people just have to take that chance. And, it's almost like there's this, a lot of people are afraid to talk to people, at a show or whatever. And it doesn't take much, all it takes to start a conversation is just like, great show, like that's all it takes to get into a conversation with someone and then, see how well you connect. And, I think a lot of people feel like it's like dating or something like that. Like you're trying to pick someone up at a bar and you're afraid to talk to them, right?
I totally understand because I was always really nervous about going up and like starting to talk to a band and, it's like dating. And, if I just made, all right, I just got to go up and say, hey, I'm Mark Needham. I really loved your set, blah, blah, blah. I work with these, some of these people. If you ever need any help, let me know, here's my card, here's my info, here's my number, whatever,
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it does. See, everyone listening, it doesn't take much. You just have to make that first attempt, and you might get some rejection along the way, but it's probably unlikely. So
it doesn't hurt that bad,
Yeah. Yeah. What's the worst that happens? Like a band needs to go to like unload their gear. Like, it's not hurting your feelings really. So as far as the artist development side of things goes, then how are you developing them? Like what is typically involved in that process for you?
It varies from artist to artist on our development stuff. I've done some that were just, stuff that they'd recorded that I helped, they brought to me, we mixed, made arrangement changes, whatever, to working from the beginning on songs, arrangements, and recording the whole thing, And, over the years, we've actually had like some pretty phenomenal success in the amount of bands that we've signed. And we've had some that really blew up and did well, that we had those kind of development contracts with the Killers, Imagine Dragons, Neon Tree, 20 something years later with the Killers, my contract on that record is still worth a boatload of money. You know what I mean? I can sell those rights. So I've had a few of those that have turned out to be long-term successes. And besides all the work and money that they brought in, it's also, it's been a great calling card for other artists. And, at this point, I'm able to sell some of those rights if I want. It's been a fantastic thing. I'm so glad that I went that direction early on.
For sure. So then how would you distinguish artist development from just being a producer then? Is it more that you're invested in the band? Or are you doing these projects for free?
Yeah, well, I'm not sitting around waiting for somebody to bring me a cool band on a label, Mm-hmm. I have, just from doing this so long, I have connections all over the country and all over the world of people who like know that I've done this and been pretty successful at it. And they, I get sent a lot of bands every day. I listen to everything. I can figure out pretty early on in a song if this is something I think there's something cool here. Just is the voice, what are the lyrics, what's the melodies like? Is there something that really just grabbed you?
For sure.
The first time I heard Dan from Imagine Dragons sing, they asked me to come over and I had a history with them through the Killers already with the Reynolds, and they asked me to come over to a show in Fremont Street in Las Vegas. I think there was more people on stage than there were in the audience because they had more members of the band at that point. But from the first 15 to 20 seconds of Dan singing, it was just like, oh my God, this guy he sells believability. Mm-hmm. He just sucks people in because it's just so believable in his voice, his delivery, and the stories. So I, it was like I put my hand up. I'm in.
Yeah. So yeah. Obviously, like you said, you've got lots of connections in the industry, and a lot of people are coming to you trying to pitch themselves or pitch their artists. So again, as far as like the production side versus like the development side, like when you're developing in an artist, is that more like you're just doing you're going to produce these bands, you're going to record them kind of for free or like with a contractual agreement that, maybe if the band blows up, you get some sort of percentage on the back end? Or is
Right.
it that kind of arrangement versus just like them paying you an upfront fee and then?
No, they don't
try-
pay
okay.
upfront. I usually am fronting the costs on stuff like that, and
Gotcha.
sometimes I'm in from the get on everything, the writing, arrangement, producing. Sometimes I'm partnering. I have a band on Hollywood Records, Almost Monday, and I brought in a friend of mine I met at a backstage at a Killers show, because he'd played me some of his songs. He was a young producer from New Zealand, and I heard his stuff and went, "Oh man, I got this other band. I've got this band I'm developing." I put them together. First song they co-wrote together was like, "Oh, this is magic." They were meant to be together, and so sometimes I partner with people on those. It's I just try to do what I think is best for the artist, and to be able to see if we can come up with something that can become a worldwide band or a worldwide artist, or a song that has impact. I love to have 100 million people listen to something that I did versus 20,000 or 1,000. You know what I mean?
Of course, yeah.
It's just that's cooler to me that you impacted a bunch of people's. They'll hear that song 20 years from now and then tell you it'll take them back to that time in their childhood or so. Or in their.
Of course. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, if you find a band that you truly believe is going to be like a really the next big thing, like, rather than trying to sell your services to them and say, "Hey, I'll record your band for X amount of money," it's like if you could be that person that could step up to the plate and be like, "Look, I believe in you so much that I'll invest my time, my efforts, my energy, in my resources into your band," like you're then becoming almost like a additional member of that band to some degree, and you're really providing a lot more value to them, so that they're gonna bring you up with them, when they become as big as they are, and vice versa too. You're gonna be helping them out because you've got the connections as well. So
I've lived very, very much on the edge financially sometimes doing stuff like that, but I'll make my manager, my wife, very nervous. Like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? I don't really like this bit," But like, if I believe in something, I try to go all in, and in the long term, just doing stuff that I really like, rather than trying to. I don't really care what's on a hit on the radio right now, or just doing stuff that I really like and makes that I think is good. As I've had more success doing that than trying to follow trends.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. I love hearing stories of people who truly believe in a band so much that, they do put that effort into helping that band get to that next level. Like one of my early mentors was Jack Richardson. Who, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jack, but he discovered the Guess Who, and he told me the story of like putting his house, like he remortgaged his house just to fund their debut record because he like believed in them so much. And then American Woman and all that stuff came out, and it was like massive project for him. But yeah, it always amazes me to hear stories of people that, truly believe in someone so much that they, put all this effort into it. And, it goes to show, like, I mean, if you have to trust your gut a lot, and really believe in it to pursue it.
You also have to know when to call it quits.
Of course, too. That's a really good point.
I see people who start doing the artist development thing and they really believe in something, and I'm looking at it and going, man, it was time. You should have cut the cord a year ago.
Yeah.
This is it. It's not working.
So with that said, then what would be some of your advice for people who are thinking about getting into artist development to identify like when maybe the artist that they're working with isn't the right person or to keep going with or investing into?
I mean, to me, it's always about, I'm looking for that artist that just has total believability in their delivery, and they have a message that's wide enough, but just cool enough that a lot of people can make it their own story, without being overly too self-centric. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You want a story, you want to be able to tell your story, but make it broad enough that, 50 million or 100 million people can make it their story. You have to know that artist is going to work as hard or harder than you it's just, I mean, there's just a lot of different things. How hard are they all going to work? Are they working are they working their social media? Somebody having a baby, and how's this going to interfere? Is their family going to be supportive? I mean, how bad do they want it, and do they know who they are? I had an artist I was developing who asked me at one point, like, who I wanted her to sound like when we were doing vocals. Like, I was trying to get her to really be her, and she asked me, well, who do you want me to sound like? I was like, oh, I think this is over with. I was like, dang, if you don't know who you are internally, I was trying to get her to that point. It just, but it's not a big deal. I mean, it's maybe this isn't the best thing right now. I don't want to work with somebody that I don't totally believe in, because then I'm not going to give them my full commitment, and I don't want to waste their time or my time. If this isn't working with me, maybe there's somebody else out there who will, bring this to where it needs to be.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean that those people aren't writing good songs or that they're not talented or anything like that. It's just that maybe as far as your long-term investment with that artist, like, you could see the writing on the wall that they're not going to pursue it to the degree that you feel like they could. So yeah, that makes sense. Or
at least not with me and what we're doing right now.
Fair.
Hey, yeah. Let's just part friends, and let's see if you get. I mean, I'm just not the right guy.
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely
bringing it out in you. Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to share with people, because they need to hear that. Yeah, not every project that you believe in is going to be a massive success, and you have to see the puzzle pieces all the way through to see whether or not it's going to come together and actually be something that be what you believe it could be. Yeah, of course, that's awesome. So then, as far as the developing side of things goes, and with the writing, you had mentioned helping people with arrangements and that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to people to improve their songwriting? Like, what kind of issues are you typically seeing from the songwriting perspective when you're developing these artists?
Arrangement stuff, a lot of odd arrangement stuff that's like, I mean, changing up arrangements and making them not quite so stock as can be great and cool. I also have to shape it a bit to a target that I know label or radio people are going to respond to. I have a lot of co-writers that I work with around the country. So I try to pair people up as well, and on those and those kind of development things, and see if I can find a writer that can really help find that artist's voice. Finding a song like Mr. Brightside, which is just such a Brandon was such a great songwriter, and his delivery was so believable. Lyrically, it's dreaming about finding your girlfriend with another guy kind of thing. But he does this. He spins that story in such a way. It became like a worldwide anthem.
Of course, yeah. It's just it was a catchy melody, catchy song,
and rather the chorus being, that shithead, I know she's not screwing another guy. It's I'm Mr. Brightside. He came up with a clever way to frame those concerns, that paranoia in his head. A lot of people don't spend really enough time, I think, on lyrics and really making clever lyrics. And without those super clever lyrics that really, it's harder for something to become a song that lasts for 20 years or that has that amazing longevity, unless you really have a lyric message that hooks people in, and they can make their own story.
Of course. And I guess there's kind of two extremes with it, right? There's the people that make song lyrics that are just like super simple, super blunt, and then there's the other side of it where it's like people who are like really going deep with metaphors and stuff like that, and you can't understand what they're saying at all. So it's like, it's kind of finding that middle ground where it's like, it's not so dumbed down that, it's like kind of cheesy writing versus, it still has to be relatable to people, right?
Yeah, it's a crooked road, and it's easy to stray like off into the ditch on the left or the right. Hopefully with developing artists, I try to bring them a little, try to keep them going down the middle of the road in some, but in a cool, it's got to be just cool, it's got to be cool and believable and from their heart.
course. It sounds like a lot of the artists that you work with, or at least one of the stipulations that you would have, is that these people have an open mind to experimenting and trying things, right? Because there's some artists that are just so like, this is the way I do things, this is my approach, and that sounds like it wouldn't quite work in an artist development situation very well.
I mean, it would if what they were doing was like, this is golden, I like, what I don't need to do. All they need to record is record this and get a cool mix that helps elevate emotionally what they're trying to get across. Mm-hmm. And, if I don't have to say, if I got nothing to complain about, then it's, but you got to be open to, you have to be open to having a conversation. And so many, I see so many bands. I've been in so many sessions with bands who spend 5 hours and break up over, discussing doing a song one way or the other way. Like they're, an 8-bar section of a song, and in literally 10 minutes you can record it both ways and listen. And if it's not, it's usually pretty obvious immediately. Yeah. If not, listen to it, put it to the side and listen to it the next morning, it's things like that are usually pretty obvious and pretty clear, and people they get off on these metaphysical discussions about stuff. And it's like, well, let's just record it this way, record it that way, and then live with it for a minute. I don't try to, make somebody something that they're not, I just I want to try to broaden their horizons a bit, but not always. Sometimes, bands come in pretty well, or artists come in and they're pretty well fairly formed, and it's this is cool. This is ready to go. There's really not much to do but try to make it sound, find a cool way to record it. I mean, the Killers were that way. We had stuff to say to the band and ideas on songs, and certainly experimenting with some sound stuff and different ways to record. But mm-hmm. I mean, overall, the stuff was, it's like, well, God, this is what it is. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that point that you brought up. It's just like, it takes 10 minutes to do it two ways, to record it two ways, and just see which way sounds best. And yeah, if you do need to sit on it, so be it. If you need to show it to some other people to get a extra opinion, then do it. It doesn't take much to at least have those options presented in front of you and to get a different opinion, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no rules. Just try things. Try if you. Don't get bogged down in that stuff. People ask me if hey, could we try blah blah blah, or do you think that's crazy? It's like, well, maybe I think it's crazy and wrong, but let's try it anyhow. That really it takes me 3 minutes. Okay, so I'm like that. Oh damn, that's actually really wrong, or that's kind of cool. So.
Yeah, I love it. I'd love to shift a little bit into some of your mixing work, because you're an amazing mixing engineer as well, and you've done lots of amazing projects. And I'm curious to know, like, with your work with bands like Imagine Dragons, like a lot of it feels very cinematic, very ambient. And I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to creating records like that, how do you go about creating that ambience? Like, how do you decide, like, which tools you're going to use, how to create that space and that size in your mixes?
I listen to the song. I mean, depending on what band it is, I listen to the song, and maybe I feel like creating a bigger space around it on, like with the Dragons or a band like Cake. We had everything completely dry and almost no compression on, but like trying to create that space. I just listen to the song and listen to the words on the song, and it doesn't have to be the same for every song on a record, but I just listen to the song and I hear ideas in my head, and I guess I've done this long enough, like 50 years, that I can, if I hear something in my head, I can pretty much always figure out how to create it. Mm-hmm. I know what all these different reverbs and halls and rooms in Emulation sound like, but before all that stuff existed, I used to figure out how to just make it with the rooms that I was in, So, if I hear something in my head, I can make it translate to the speakers really usually pretty fast.
Gotcha. Do you have any like go-to reverbs that you tend to use?
If I do, I usually stop doing it if I start going to something too much.
Okay.
I just don't like to do this. I try to figure out different ways to do things a lot, so I don't get stuck in ruts. But I mean, I use, I'm a UAD artist. I love UAD stuff, and I use, all of their reverbs. I still have some, like, I go back to Revive for spring reverb sometimes. There's a lot of Altiverb stuff I use. Whatever I think will get what I'm hearing in my head, and I make up my own, weird combinations of stuff, all the time.
That's very cool. Yeah, I mean, you're having fun with it, and you're creating. Well, I guess to go, like, earlier you said that when you didn't have those tools, you figured out a way of making them. So yeah, you probably could work with any tool and make it do what you need it to do, right?
Well, there's always like, you have one reverb, but you can make it, shorter or longer. You can EQ it. You can have different compression on it. You can, you can have pre-delays that go to pre-delays and then gating off the individual. There's a million ways to take any one or two tools and have them do 50,000 different jobs. I think I had to figure out how to do that stuff when I was still on analog all the time, how I'm going to come up with this kind of room sound, or just pushing stuff to the extremes, I guess, is one way to try to use those tools, especially in the digital world. I mean, if I get a new plugin, the first thing I like to do is like turn all the knobs all the way up, or in whatever weird configuration, and see what odd things it can do,
Yeah, just hear those extremes when it's all the way up, all the way down, and then find the stuff in between that works.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Another element that I was curious to ask you about when it comes to your mixes is the drum sounds. And I think you do a great job with your drums. And one element that I hear you often do is you'll blend in like samples along with like the sound of live drums. Am I right in that? I'm hearing some samples in there.
Yeah,
maybe?
It depends on the song. I mean, I do a lot of stuff. I just did a Latin jazz record that I was working with a friend of mine on. So on that, it's all supernatural kind of sound. But I've been blending stuff like that, making combinations of machine drum, live drum blends for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So then when you're doing a mix, like how much of the samples are usually sent to you in the sessions that you get versus like what you're adding? I guess it depends on what style of music it is that you're working with. Right?
Yeah, that depends on who recorded and did the initial production. Sometimes on the, I'll get a session with 7 kick drums where they have trying to do something with different drums, creating a pattern, but there's so many phase issues going on that it's like every third or fourth kick drum completely disappears, and so I mean sometimes I'll go back and just recreate that with my own. If theirs is too difficult to fix, I'll just go back and create my own. I have I have years and years of samples. Whenever I do something that I think is cool, I usually just that's a cool snare, or that's a cool kick sound, or whatever that is. I just cut it and sample it to my hard drive.
It's a great idea. Yeah, then you get tons of samples to work with in the future, so you can always pull those up.
Yeah,
again if you need, right?
I'm recording stuff and I get a live drum sound that I think is super awesome. I did one. This album I was working with Matt Chamberlain on. Maybe a year ago. I have a couple different things I've done with Matt, but like we were trying different drums, and we had this one kind of really open big kick drum that's just like, oh my God, all right, I'm going to use that somewhere else too, So, just over the years, I accumulate everything. Anytime I think something that's cool or unique, I just try to save it.
That's very cool. So then, as far as implementing samples into your sound, how do you decide what samples to use? Like, do you have a philosophy on that or an approach to it that you like to follow?
Again, I just listen to the song, and I usually know, I got to kind of know what most of those sounds are that I have in all my sample drives, and there's a lot of it's hard to go back and remember, like, I don't know. But I usually have a pretty good idea in my head, and I'll grab, they like these three, kicks or whatever, and, this one works cool, or a blend of these three or something. But I usually have a pretty good idea in my head, I know what I have on my sample drive,
Gotcha.
And again, I usually try to just get, if I'm listening to a song, I try to have just a vision in my head where it should go, and I try taking it there. And if that doesn't work, I go, all right, well, what would another thought be? Let's take it to this. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a important point that you bring up too, of just like having that vision, and really, when you're mixing, you have to have that vision of what the end result's going to be. If you're just kind of throwing things at it to see what sticks, it's going to become sloppy very quickly, and it's going to take you forever to finish. So having that vision is definitely important, right?
I mean, it might be a good idea for people who are just starting at this to just try to learn how to hear the sound on a song. How can I create that? This is an exercise. I mean, I've done that for years. And just get where you can get to the point where if you hear, if you can hear it in your head, you can just make it quickly happen in the speakers. And I also tell people not to get quite so bogged down in all the different choices. Which compressors am I going to use? It's like, all right, I know I want the vocal to sound like this. I'll use this compressor set kind of this way. I know in my head what that'll do to that voice. And 98% of the time, I'm pretty close to right. I've been friends with Chris Alge for years, and it's like, just commit, just make a decision. I'm kind of the same philosophy. Just, I know what I want it to sound like, and let's just let me just quickly put that together and go, oh, this is cool, or how about I can go back and approach it a little more. Let me go veer 20 degrees to the right or something. But so I can usually put a song together pretty fast and see if this is the direction I think it should go. Sometimes I'll get a ref out early to an artist and go, rather than just presenting them with, here's your finished mix. I try to, especially more now where very few mixers are in person. I try to get the artist involved pretty early. Like, here's kind of a ref of where I was going. Could we go a little more blah, blah, blah? Let me, so I try to, so that way I don't invest the time to getting this, working really hard to finish up a mix that's a certain way. And then you get, that's just not the vision I had for this,
Mm-hmm. But I like that approach of consulting with the artists and showing them your references and making sure everyone's on the same page. Because, going into a project, whether you're producing it or you're just mixing it, whatever, it's like, it's good to know where people's heads are at, what kind of things they like and what they don't like. That way you can get those results faster.
I mean, I'm not mixing my song. If I want to just mix my song, I'll just make my own song and do it, So, I like to keep the artist involved as part of the decision making, on, getting into really specific things of how to accomplish something that I usually just do on my own in my head. But I like, I'm mixing their song, and I want the artist to feel that that's invoking the emotion that they wanted, that the sound of the song is evoking the emotion or supporting the emotion that they're trying to get across.
For sure. And I guess there's also another balance when you are coming up with that vision and referencing other material. There is also that balance of keeping the artist's original sound and making them sound unique versus like completely chasing sounds from a different record and like trying to make the artist sound like that other artist, right? There's kind of that happy middle ground there where you can kind of take ideas from certain genres or to certain references. And
yeah, I mean, people send me songs to reference, like, oh, we want to sound like so and so, and I usually just do what I do first, and then I'll go back and reference that. I never started a mix trying to sound like another artist that's on the radio or vintage artist, or I don't ever really start in my head trying to make it sound like somebody else.
Yeah,
that seems silly to me.
Yeah, and it also kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier with like the singer saying like, "Who do I sound like?" or "Who do you want me to sound like?" It's like you're missing the point. Like, you're the unique artist here. Like, we want you to sound a little different.
I mean, I don't know that U2 was really referencing anybody when they went, or Sly Stone was referencing like, I want to be exactly like blah blah blah, or I mean, Tom Petty, whatever, any other, they're just the Eagles. I mean, certainly they're all pulling from things that they've heard, but their vision isn't to go out and sound like another band that's on the radio right now. I mean, that's like a recipe for disaster, I think.
Of course. I love it.
I would always rather be, I would like to be put out the song that everybody else is trying to follow for the next 5 years, rather than listening to Spotify and trying to sound like whatever the current thing is. You want to be the person everybody else is trying to be.
Of course. And by the time you actually get, if you are chasing a certain sound, or you're chasing whatever the big single is now, it's like, by the time you actually get that song out, people have moved on. They found something else. So
yeah, well, that song was done. It was done maybe a year ago, and yours will be, it'll be a whole different. I mean, it's always better to try to be out there on the cutting edge, I think.
I agree with that for sure. Another element of your mixes that I was curious to ask you about was, again, in relation to your drums, I think more specifically, I hear like in the heavier rock stuff, you tend to use saturation on your drums. Am I correct in hearing that?
A lot of times I do. Again, not if I'm going for that sound. Yeah, I'll saturate stuff. I mean, distortion's a cool tool to use to get more harmonics on stuff. So, if I'm trying to get something that really has that kind of impact, yeah, I distort stuff. I mean, some things I don't at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and like some of the Imagine Dragon stuff, like I feel like it just sounds like really big and like, kind of, I can hear like a little saturation in there, but it adds like character to the stuff to make it feel a lot bigger.
I was just mixing a song for producer in the UK that I've been doing a lot of stuff with, and from his ref mix, I just didn't understand what he was trying to do in the chorus. I'm listening to the ref mix, and it's really kind of clean, and finally went, like that stomp in one of some Imagine Dragons song. I went, oh well, there's put a V76, throw that in my drum side chain, or my drum parallel compression bus, and beat that shit out of it, and it was like, oh, okay, well, that's exactly what I wanted. He just sent me an email before we got on. It's like, oh my god, that's it.
Well, I mean, you're the guy to go for that then, if he's got that reference, if it's even adding a sample of it or something like that in there,
I mean, there's a lot of guys who use that, from console distortion to, we used to always record bass. We used to do a lot of bass stuff through a 1073 and just crank the gain stage all the way up, so it just started to saturate the bass. I mean, that's been, people have been doing that since rock and roll started. It's a cool tool that makes things, to add more harmonics and more aggression to stuff.
For sure. So then when you're using saturation, what sort of effect are you typically trying to achieve with it?
I mean, it's also song dependent to me, because there's so many different things I can use to get. I've got 100 different plugins that'll give me distortion, and it's whether I'm looking for something that's just. I mean, I use that. I used a lot of the UAD stuff, the V76, some of those preamp distortions. I have a ton of different, like, just weird little pedal distortion plugins. that I use on a lot of stuff. I've been using one, like the Black Hop one I've been using on vocals on a record I was doing. The Thermonic Culture Vulture is great. Decapitator's always... I don't use that as much as I used to, but it's always a good, solid go-to. I mean, with a lot of the new emulations of plugins, just taking a compressor and cranking it all the way up actually achieves, because they're usually, if they're emulating these plugins now, they do it really just overdrive, so they do it at all different forms of the input level. So there's just so many ways to overdrive stuff. Like I said, whenever I get a new plugin, let's see if we turn everything up,
Yeah.
It's all the way down this way. But, just go through all your different plugins and try them at, very little in the most extreme. And, you can do some cool stuff in between those and just know what that stuff sounds like in your head and be able to, so that way you can make that choice that this distortion is going to be something subtle that works on this. I mean, like for that, that big distorted stomp thing, there's that V76 works well because you can really saturate, but the bottom end doesn't go away. It just adds that super tough thing, in the upper mid-range harmonics on that stomp or that kick that really allows it to cut through with that, That's that thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I love that, and it's pretty cool what you can get away with sometimes when you like you said, just if you crank up all your knobs on your compressor or whatever it is, like you can find some surprising effects that can be really handy at some point.
I mean, I use a console emulation in part of my stereo bus, where you can really get that overdriven console. I mean, there's so many great mixers who have done that for years. Just, if you look at their stereo butts on the console, it's just slammed, Manny's great at that. There's all those, there's so many different places you can introduce that kind of harmonic stuff as an overall thing or just on particular instruments that just, it's a way of adding some different harmonics to stuff, and they can be really jagged or they can be smoother harmonics. They can be second order, third order. But to me, just sit for 2 hours and with a vocal, a guitar, a bass, and a drum, and just what if I do this? So you have 100 new scenarios in your brain that hopefully you can go to when you hear a specific song and want to achieve that particular sound at a spot in a song.
I love that. Yeah, it's like almost like just spend some time almost trying to break your gear or use it the wrong way to hear just what's possible with it.
I mean, I mix so many songs per year that I have a lot of different scenarios in my brain that I can go back to, or things that I tried on something that maybe didn't even work. I remember, I tried this on such and such a song, the band hated it, but I know it'd be cool for this, because I probably do at least 300 songs a year, every year for the past 30 years or something.
That's a lot. So yeah, you definitely, especially with digital recording, it's so easy to just save a preset when you find something cool, right? Save your channel.
Yeah, besides my saving stuff to my sample drive, I save a lot of presets of stuff that I just saved one the other day that I was like, oh, this is a super cool vocal sound for this. So yeah, I just save that stuff as little markers that makes it easy to go back to.
I love it. I love that, so many years into this, you're still experimenting, still learning, still trying to find new things and new sounds. And yeah, that's amazing. I think that speaks to your time in this industry and how you've been able to have such a long, successful career with this.
My number one goal is to have a lot of fun making music. It's nice I get paid for it as well. But that's kind of been my goal since I started, just to have, God bless all the bands and fans who bought this stuff over the years, the stuff that I've done, because I get paid to just sit here and have fun every day.
For sure. I love it. And it kind of sounds like you take that philosophy and you apply it to everything you do, whether it's, finding a new artist and having fun, like just enjoying their music and believing in that person, or if it's on the mixing side of it and experimenting with stuff there and having fun with it. It sounds like you're just trying to have fun doing it and not treat it like it's as much of a job and just enjoy it. And I think that's definitely a big thing that keeps people in this long term, because if you do start to get to that point where you're not having fun, what's the point, right? You're going to be miserable with it.
And it's not like I'm a heart surgeon. If I try something that doesn't work, somebody doesn't die on the table, I'm like, well, all right, we'll go back and do it again a different way,
Right on, for sure. I love that. Well, Mark, I don't want to take up too much more of your time because I know you probably got a ton of stuff on your plate today, but if people want to learn more about you or follow you online, what's the best place for them to do that?
Just markneedham.com is our website, and you can reach out to us through the website there, or we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all that as well.
Awesome.
But if you want to send a message, there's contact at markneedham.com, and that's on the website.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, again, Mark, thank you so much for doing this, and I think you shared a lot of great advice here. And I think, as far as the things like the artist development side of things goes, I think there's a lot of great stuff that people are going to take from that, and even as far as the mixing side of it goes, like a lot of great tips you shared there too. So I do really appreciate you being on here today.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Right on. So that was my conversation with Mark Needham, and it was great to hear Mark's philosophies on artist development and all of the things that go into it. And I thought that he brought up some really good points about finding the right artist and finding the people that are truly worth investing your time and your resources with, because, there are a lot of people that are very talented out there, but it's finding the right people who you truly believe you can help them get to that next level with. And also that they believe themselves that they can get to that next level, and they're willing to put in that time and effort so that you can mutually work towards a similar goal. I also thought that Mark brought up some really good points about ways to get clients through the door and to diversify your clientele. I love what he was saying about how he didn't want to just be known as the guy who did the Chris Isaak sound, and how part of his efforts to diversify his sound and to diversify what he was known for was to find some of these artists and to show that he believed in them and to invest his skills into it to develop them. I think that these are just some really cool approaches that if you're thinking about how to grow your studio business and what kind of things you can do to make sure that you're attracting the right people or the right sound or keeping yourself diverse, I think there's a lot of great tips that Mark shared in this interview. So you'll definitely want to go back and listen to this and start to implement a lot of these things into your own process. So I hope that you found that interview very helpful, that you got a lot of great ideas from it. And yeah, Mark is just amazing. He's got such a great history in this industry. So definitely someone whose advice you're going to want to try to implement. So with that said, if you did enjoy this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live, because we've got so many great episodes lined up for you with a lot of other great tips that you can implement to help you with your recordings and to help you with your mixes. And speaking of that, you're definitely going to want to check out MasterYourMix.com. That is another great resource for you to check out, where on that website, I help out musicians with creating pro-sounding recordings from their home studios, helping you get the clarity that you need so that you can create music that sounds the way you hear it in your head. And on that website, I've got tons of great resources, everything from books to courses to coaching programs. So there's some freebies on there. You definitely want to check it out. And one resource that you should definitely check out while you're there is called The Mixing Mindset. This is a book that I put out a few years ago that really breaks down the process of mixing, makes it very step-by-step for you, very straightforward, so that you know what to be listening for, what steps to follow, what things to do, in what order, how to dial in settings to get that sound that you ultimately want. So definitely check that out. It's called The Mixing Mindset, and it's available at MasterYourMix.com. So that is it for this episode today. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very end, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next one. Take care. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.